Hola and welcome to the Get Down. I'm Ritzy P. In this episode's All Things Butterscotch segment with CEO and Managing Editor of Butterscotch Media, Cleve Mesidor, we will discuss how crypto policy must be bipartisan. And today, Cleve is going to be having a conversation with former Congressman Wiley Nickel. Wiley was the U.S. representative of the 13th District of North Carolina during the 118th Congress, serving a 50-50 toss-up district in Raleigh and surrounding metro area. Wiley served on the Financial Services Committee and the Digital Assets Subcommittee and has been a champion for expanding the group for pro-crypto Democrats. He led the way to secure support for 71 House Democrats on FIT 21 and was a Democrat lead on the Congressional Review Act to overturn SAB 121. Prior to being elected to Congress, Wiley served as a North Carolina state senator, attorney, and worked for 2 White House administrations. So now let's get into All Things Butterscotch with Cleve Mesidor. Hola, Cleve. How are you?
Hey, Ritzy. I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm well, thanks. So I'm really looking forward to your interview with former Congressman Wiley Nickel, who did a lot to advance bipartisanship in crypto policy. How did you guys first meet?
Yeah, he is an amazing champion for crypto policy. As you just mentioned, he just left Congress. He served in the 118th Congress. A lot of the inroads we made over the last 2+ years to get more Democrats on board can be attributed to him. We met last March 2024, when he actually held the first digital assets briefing for Democrats. And this briefing was for members. It was an invitation for members to attend to learn. I was one of the speakers his office invited. They also had somebody from a union there. They wanted members of Congress to hear from everyday people. And about 15 members of Congress showed up to not just listen, but ask questions. And so that event was very pivotal. And as you saw, he led the way for a lot of bipartisan votes. And even now that he's left Congress, just about 3 months, he's still a champion. He just spoke at the Digital Asset Summit in New York City. And we're excited to have him with us. And I'm excited to have the conversations. I know you usually interview our mainstream guests, but I'm excited to do this one this time.
Yeah, no, that's going to be great. Change it up a little bit. So can you tell us some of his key accomplishments in Congress?
As you mentioned, one of the biggest things we needed to do, especially last Congress, was rally Democrats, get more Democratic votes. We know that the Biden administration was not very warm to crypto, and Senator Elizabeth Warren had a whole mess of champions who use consumer protection as some type of stronghold, which only hurt bipartisanship in crypto. So as you mentioned, Congressman Nickel definitely helped to advance FIT 21 on a bipartisan basis last Congress. And this Congress, this summer, we're hoping to be able to take up market structure legislation again. And he led the way, as you mentioned, for the overturning of SAB 121, which Biden advanced, but it was recently reversed by the SEC. So, a lot of his footprint on legislation. And I'm definitely going to ask him about what's next. There's a lot of speculation about if he's going to run for office, what next. I think the timing of those announcements is just not there yet, but lots to come.
Great. So let's talk about why is bipartisanship important to inclusion in policymaking, especially as Congress advances stablecoin legislation?
Yeah, so we've seen this administration being very crypto friendly, but it is important to have regulatory and policy framework that is written into law, right? We need something that is ironclad, similar to what happened in the 1990s with the internet regulatory framework. The internet lobbyists worked on a bipartisan basis to get a sweet deal. And today we're trying to roll back some of those provisions. I think we will hear Senator Nickel talk about this as well. we have to move beyond executive orders. We have to move beyond actions that can be overturned by the next administration. Bipartisanship is the only way to do that. It is getting those champions. And as I've mentioned on the podcast before, this Congress, we have, new class of freshmen members of Congress that are pro-crypto. We have the Congressional Black Caucus and the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus, where there's a lot of champions. And so we must advance not just the stablecoin legislation. It's April now, and the plan, at least what Republicans are saying, that they think they can actually get stablecoins passed this month. We should have done it last Congress. Thrilled that hopefully it will happen this month, but we need to pass market structure. And then there's so many other pieces of legislation that we need to advance to actually get that regulatory framework. And bipartisanship is the only way to do that. We need both chambers on board, but we also need both parties.
Right. We got to work together for sure. So there's a lot of crypto activity in Washington, and you just attended the SEC Crypto Task Force first roundtable. How did that go?
I was thrilled to attend. It was a great convening. The SEC has formed its first ever crypto task force led by CFTC Commissioner Hester Pierce, who's amazing, who's such a champion, who's so thoughtful on the issue. And, while we've seen the White House hold its first White House summit, right, we even saw the CFTC have its first crypto roundtable, and those were both focused on CEOs. Kudos to the team at the SEC who made sure that this conversation included various perspectives from a myriad of leaders with different backgrounds. When I say representation matters, it matters most in policy. And I can tell you, being there with other senior leaders in crypto was amazing to see. There were some crypto skeptics, there were founders, there were attorneys, there were industry leaders. The conversation was very robust. And when you think of folks like Sumira Yunus, who has been working with Commissioner Pierce for a long time, who's now with the task force, and Lyndon Zinda, who used to work on the Hill for Congressman Emmer, who just left Coin Center to join the SEC's crypto task force. I really commend them because the conversation was robust. It needed to happen. There were conversations about how do you determine if a digital asset is a security or commodity, when and if the Howey test should apply, and what is the scope of investor protections to make sure that people can participate while there's risk mitigation at play. I'm glad to see all of this activity in DC, but, really commend the SEC to Crypto Task Force for this first convening. It's a unique time for crypto policy. Lots more on the horizon in DC, not just this month, but throughout this whole year. The crypto takeover of DC is going to continue to materialize.
Fantastic. And speaking of horizons, what's on the horizon for Butterscotch?
Oh my God. Well, it's April, it's Financial Literacy Month. So, as a media platform, education is so core to what we need to do because public information is a public good. So we'll continue to do the work of the newsletter, the podcast, and some of the events that we do. But we're going to be highlighting some of the events focused on financial literacy. In Congress, there's a Financial Literacy and Wealth Creation Caucus, and they have announced some activities for April. For the audience out there, definitely tune into our weekly newsletter, Choose, so you can stay up to date on what's happening on Financial Literacy Month. And as well as there's a lot of other activity happening within the crypto industry. Lots of conferences coming up. I'm going to be speaking at an AI and housing conference talking about the intersection of AI and crypto. And I believe that's like mid-April. So we're going to continue to do what we do at this time when there's so much skepticism around traditional media where people are really concerned about the authenticity of the information they get. We're thrilled that Butterscotch can be that platform where we focus on sharing information that people can't get out there about the crypto space and really provide a service. So excited to build on the work that you and I have been doing for, oh my God, over a year now.
I know went by so fast, but yes, get ready to see us and hear us all over the place. So thank you, Cleve, and I look forward to our next discussion about all things butterscotch.
Well, thank you for joining us, Congressman Nickel. I'm very excited to dive in. And it's always a pleasure to amplify fellow former Obama alums in crypto. Let's get right into the conversation. Last Congress, you did a lot of work to educate Democratic members of Congress about the benefits of blockchain and cryptocurrency. That's how we first met, right? It was the crypto briefing that you held for Democrats, and about 15 members attended. And that went a long way to foster bipartisanship. And we're seeing that now. What inspired you to become a crypto champion in Congress?
Well, I think that's a great point about the message, the work we did educating folks in Congress. And you certainly did an important job as part of that effort. I think we just go back to where we were a little over 2 years ago. In Congress with Democrats, crypto was a bad word. People only thought about FTX. It was, for me, an important place where we could actually get some bipartisan work done that would help the folks I represented in North Carolina. A powerful tool for financial inclusion and an important thing we have to get right for the future of the digital dollar, to make sure we have the consumer protections in place to stop the next FTX. For me, this was a place where I think some Democrats were not truly understanding the issue. They weren't digging down into the weeds to learn about how these great innovators and companies were leaving the U.S. because of the bad regulatory policy we had. For me, it was an amazing opportunity to get something done. Blockchain technology has the power to transform the lives of so many people if we get it right. We voted for the first time in Congress on crypto legislation. I did those education meetings with members to educate folks. And when people listen, when people understand the issues, they're with us. And that was my big lesson from this. This is an issue where you just got to educate people. And if you do, they're going to be with you.
Absolutely. And we definitely needed your voice because that was a period of time you mentioned after FTX, but also there are a lot of crypto skeptics who just didn't want to engage. And I think a lot of members appreciated you opening up the conversation for them to explore, for them to learn more. And that did go a long way. And you continue to be a champion of Web3 and DeFi. You just spoke at the Digital Assets Summit in New York City. What was that like?
Well, it was a very different mood for the folks there. I think that the work Gary Gensler did was frankly hostile to the entire industry. Now we have a different change with the current administration at the SEC. I talked to dozens of people who were part of businesses that were coming back to the U.S. And that's a good thing. Bringing back those innovators, that's important. The point I made was the same one I keep making. In whatever industry you're in, if you care about successful regulation and what happens in Washington, you've got to do it in a bipartisan way. If it becomes a partisan political football, it's just going to go back and forth with each administration. So if you want lasting change, it's important that Republicans continue working with Democrats on these issues. And I think that's what we're seeing in Congress right now. The Genius Act, the Senate version of the stablecoin bill, moved through the Senate at the committee level with bipartisan support. I think that's an important place to start. I hope the administration understands they have a great chance to work with Democrats, but you got to meet them halfway. And that's what I hope we'll continue seeing.
Yeah, I read one of the articles about your participation in the Digital Assets Summit, and it was all about your call for a bipartisan framework, a framework rooted in law where we're actually passing legislation, having those discussions. I think of the 1990s when Congress debated the framework for the internet. Today, we're trying to roll back some of the provisions that the folks who lobbied for that framework were able to secure. And certainly today, that has to continue to be the vision, and we can only move that forward on a bipartisan basis. What's your vision for that ultimate framework?
Well, I'm very hopeful that they'll build off the success we had in the last Congress with Fit 21. finally get that over the finish line. It's important that we keep digital innovation in the U.S. That's something I spent a lot of time working on. But it's also important that we protect consumers. And right now, without legislation, we're not safe for the folks we represent. The next FTX certainly could be there. Passing regulation goes a long way. This is the only industry that's come to Congress and said, we want to be regulated. We just want to know the rules of the road. And that's what legislation does. It takes the courts out of the process, and just says, these are the rules. You follow them, you can operate here. If you don't, you're going to be in trouble. And I think those are the core issues here, and then you kind of get into the next level of there's a lot of regulatory gaps between the SEC and the CFTC. We did a lot of work to try to fill those holes. And hopefully this Congress gets it there. But this is the year it's got to happen. If we're still waiting on this next year, the partisan politics before the midterm election ramp up. So before the end of the year really is the hope for any of these bills if you really care about bipartisan legislation.
I agree absolutely. As you've mentioned, it's a new era for crypto policy. It's a much more positive Washington. And, I commend you again for the work that you did last Congress, advancing Fit 21 on a bipartisan basis, and even the work you did to get Democrats to help overturn in just the last 3 months. SAB 121 is no more. And we're seeing more bipartisanship in some of these votes. At the end of the day, we still need to pass stablecoin legislation that is now on the table and get quickly to market structure. What is your thoughts on the current state of crypto? What's working, what's not working?
Well, I have some thoughts, but first, we moved a lot of bills through the House in my time in Congress, but the one bill that ended up passing the House, passing the Senate, getting onto the president's desk, my bill was the SAB 121 CRA, which Biden vetoed. That was a frustrating piece of that, but really glad that staff accounting bulletin was rescinded with this current administration. I think the future hopefully is one where we have good regulation. And I think the place where we are now with all these debates is making sure we support the good actors. That's the one thing that I think is really important. You have a lot of good actors in this space and then some bad actors like any industry, and concerned that some of the bad actors could be emboldened with the wrong regulatory approach. But I think there's a very good middle ground here from what I see happening in Congress.
Yeah, you are absolutely right. This is an industry that wants legislation, but the bad actors persist. That's not unique to crypto, but we have to make sure as we move forward that we are looking at guardrails and making sure that we're holding the industry accountable, but also holding Washington accountable to ensure there's a framework. Because without the rules of the road, it's hard to just point to the bad actors. Let's shift to the policy that is before Congress right now. You know this from having served in the House Financial Services Committee and the Digital Assets Subcommittee. Despite the efforts by McHenry and Waters and members like you, stablecoin legislation stalled last Congress. And now there's a hope that, April is the time to get it done and that this Congress can get it done. Are you optimistic that we can actually move stablecoin past the hurdle, sign into law, and then move on to market structure?
I think stablecoin legislation is the lowest hanging fruit. That's a place where you can get a lot of support from Democrats. I think most people understand that we need to move a bill here. This is important for the strength of the dollar, making sure we remain the global reserve currency. Our sanctions are much more powerful because of our status there. We know tremendous benefits as we move to conducting business more online with Web3. It's really important that we move stablecoin legislation. We saw a bipartisan vote in the Senate at the committee level with Kirsten Gillibrand leading the way for Democrats, along with Republicans. I think we're going to see that bill move through the Senate and should move through the House. I'm going to be watching the number of Democrats who support it. A number above 70 would send a big, strong signal that this continues to be a very bipartisan issue. The devil's always in the details, and I'm hopeful that French Hill will be able to continue the work he did in the last Congress, where he was reaching out to all groups for support in Congress, and I think he'll do the same. So I think that's important. And then as soon as that happens, we move on to the next thing, which is the market structure bill and filling those regulatory gaps that exist as well. I'm very optimistic. The last Congress was one of the least productive Congresses in our nation's history, but the bill that I co-sponsored with Democrats, Fit 21, our market structure bill, made it through. And it was the only big thing we did that wasn't a must-pass bill. So this is one place. And if we can start agreeing on things like this, hopefully it's a good signal for all the other big issues we got to tackle in Congress.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Because as you mentioned, we got so close on stablecoins last Congress. But just like you just said, you led the charge with SAB 121 and Biden vetoed it. But here we are. And the outcome we wanted actually did happen. I'm optimistic about stablecoin legislation and excited to dive into market structure. We're trying to figure it out. We have that big picture. And I think there's a goal to go deeper, look at other provisions. And certainly one of the conversations that is happening around both bills is consumer protection. I'm one of those critics of the term consumer protection because for a lot of people of color, it screams patriarchy. Consumer protection policies have actually kept people out. And I think it's important to focus on risk mitigation for all consumers. And risk mitigation includes financial and education, deploying tools to combat frauds and scams, but also promoting safe access for all. What are your thoughts, particularly given all of the changes to the CFPB? We need to make sure there are guardrails in place, but we can't have that same approach to consumer protection as a weapon as has been in the past.
I think there's an important balance there, and you got it just right bringing that up. The consumer protections I'm really looking for are people who put money into FTX and lost a whole bunch. Where are you going to go if it's this company in the Bahamas where you have no recourse? We need to bring people into the financial system here in the U.S. For me, it's really about helping the folks that I represent save money. And that's one of the things that Web3 has an amazing potential to cut costs, especially looking at remittances to other parts of the world. A huge chunk of that gets taken out with fees that you can easily avoid with crypto and digital wallets. So I think the goal is to make sure we're continuing to do things that help bring down those costs.
Yeah, excellent points, because too many people have not been able to participate in the financial system. And crypto has expanded that. Absolutely, there's risk to all investments. People looking to build wealth are going to face risk, but there's ways to mitigate risk. So we just have to strike that right balance. And I know at the heart of this whole conversation around consumer protection has been the most vulnerable communities. And we've seen that with Web3 and DeFi, the earliest and largest adapters have been communities of color, the working class, young people. This continues to be a large segment of the ecosystem. And financial inclusion has to continue to be a part of that conversation. What are your thoughts as we look into rulemaking? The focus now is where it should be, right? Global competitiveness. How do we ensure that the U.S. leads, but also that innovators can innovate here? As we're focused on global competitiveness, we have to focus on small business competitiveness. That's the heart of financial inclusion. How can we make sure that smaller players, entrepreneurs, even SMEs, traditional SMEs who want to enter the space can actually do so?
Looking at my time in Congress as we were talking about financial inclusion and allowing, where this kind of debate was, it was really just strange for me, about allowing people to do what they want to do with their own money. I was the Democratic lead on an accredited investor bill. This bill passed with 383 votes in the House, but still some folks voted against it. And it was allowing folks to go take a test administered by FINRA to be an accredited investor. So you could invest in these very lucrative private markets. And what they say is that people are just too stupid to do what they want with their money. And for me, that was really frustrating. That's part of this whole issue. You have some that think people are too stupid to do what they want. We were hearing that the SEC was going to raise the limit from $1 million to be an accredited investor, not including the value of your home, but to over $5 million. But still, the point is, if you got $50,000, $100,000, you want to put it into private markets somehow, you ought to be able to. And the same with crypto. That's kind of part of these debates here. I think that is, for me, a big part of this. And when we start talking about that issue with many Democrats that I served with in the House, they start really getting it and coming on board.
Yeah, and thank you for your leadership on that, because I know the accredited investor role has been a sore spot, not just for professionals of color, but even, for women, professional women, even wealthy women struggle to become accredited investors. And we, as you started out by saying, we need to give people flexibility to build their money and to make decisions about their own wealth building. And we shouldn't have government regulations put barriers to that without real justification, in my opinion.
1,000%.
Well, I want us to wrap up a bit, and I have a few wrap-up questions for you. But before we do, what is next for you? I know there's a lot of speculation.
Well, we're trying to figure that out. Unfortunately, my time in Congress was cut short because of extreme partisan gerrymandering. In 2022, we flipped one of just 6 Republican seats from red to blue. But my district was erased by Republicans here in North Carolina. Taking a good look at our Senate race in the next few weeks, hopefully we'll have a decision. North Carolina Senate seat is going to be a very important race in this next election, hoping to get back to Washington to continue the work that we started.
Well, I can tell you we miss you in Washington. We thank the people of North Carolina for having loaned you to us, and excited that that might happen again. We need policymakers like you who are thoughtful on making sure that we're really thinking about the public and empowering them to make decisions for themselves, but creating rules that actually foster innovation. Is there anything you want to compel the audience to consider, some type of call to action?
I think it's just a super simple issue with Washington and making change. It doesn't happen in the halls of Congress. It happens when people make their voice heard. And I think with any legislation that's significant that passes, it's only going to get there when people get involved, make their voice heard. There's a ton of ways to do it, but focus on issues, educate members of Congress, share your thoughts. Everybody's got 2 senators and a member of the House. Tell them what you think. And that, for me, is such an important part as a member of Congress. We got to see that data all the time. It's really important to know what's on people's minds. If you can hear the sound of my voice, know that your voice is incredibly important in Washington, and making it heard is the way we get change.
And that is powerful coming from you. Again, as I said on the outset, we first met when you wanted to educate your colleagues, right? It wasn't oh my God, let's educate the public. You started with a briefing to educate your colleagues, because we can't take for granted that folks are aware of this information, but also people want opportunities for engagement, to learn more, and also in smaller, safe spaces. So you're already a living example of making sure that people are contacting their members of Congress, but making sure that they are learning from trusted resources as well. And I want to end with something fun. On your social media, you talk about Rolling Stone calling you an anodyne. What is that?
It's just in my personality. I'm sometimes a little more soft-spoken, and I don't try to stir up fights where I don't have to, and, bring people together. That was what I focused on in Congress, going there as a diplomat to build relationships. That's really the biggest lesson of Congress. You don't get anything done unless you can build relationships with folks. Those personal relationships are so important. I do my best to represent everybody, and I think that was what that was about.
No, I had to look up the word, but
Too, though. Yeah.
but I think it fits you perfectly. And we need more leaders like you in Washington, where the situation is so polarizing right now, and it's a bottleneck to get things done. So we need more leaders who are consensus builders, who are bridge builders, who focus on solutions rather than the problems.
Amen to that. I really appreciate it.
As we close, how can the audience get in touch with you?
Yeah, our website is wileynickel.com. I'm at Wiley Nickel on Twitter, Wiley Nickel NC on Facebook and Instagram. Follow us, check out our website. Those are the main places to stay in touch, and hope folks will.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Congressman, for your time, for your insights. To our audience, please tune in for our next episode. We're happy to get this level of insight from former Congressman Wiley Nickel, and excited to watch what's next for him.
Thanks so much. It was great. So great to see you.
Good seeing you too.